This is home to the world's largest population of one-horned rhinoceros. But the heavyweights are in danger after weeks of monsoon rains in the remote state of Assam in northeast India. There's only 3,500 of them left on the planet, and the one-horned species is listed as vulnerable. 17 of them died in monsoon floods last year, and with such a small population, every rhino counts. Aid agencies say the situation's critical in Assam. Hundreds of villages are underwater, destroying crops and livelihoods. The government stepped up its rescue operation, setting up dozens of relief camps. But people here say it's too little, too late. The relentless rains have triggered almost daily landslides, blocking roads and damaging bridges. Some rivers have burst their banks and others are in danger of overflowing. And there's the risk of disease. Pumps have been contaminated and stagnant water can lead to diarrhea, malaria and dengue fever.
When the infrastructure is weak, rain like this can become deadly, and that's what's happened this time in central and western China. Over 1 million people have been displaced, over 50 so far have lost their lives, dozens are still missing, and almost 40,000 homes much like this have collapsed. Also, almost 1 million hectares of crops have been washed away. Now, it's difficult really to calculate the economic losses. In Hunan alone, the provincial authority says that the economic losses, the direct ones, are $1.2 billion. Now, according to the non-profit China Water Risk, floods are the most deadly form of natural disaster, and China is the most susceptible country in the world to the dangers of flooding.
Heavy downpours have hit Jiangda County in China's Tibet Autonomous Region. Water levels have exceeded the banks in some rivers. One residential building on the edge of a river collapsed. It's still unknown whether there are people trapped inside. Authorities are taking precautions in the face of continuing rain. Many residents have been evacuated to safety.
The French capital has been drenched with 3 weeks of rain in just an hour. 18 metro stations had to close because of flooding, and on the roads as well. Some drivers didn't seem to notice the change in road conditions. Paris Fire Brigade was overwhelmed with emergency calls, 1,700 in all. West of France as well. In Nantes, more than 100 millimeters of rain fell in just a few hours.
Flames lick the banks of the highway as residents rush to escape the blaze. More than a dozen wildfires are raging across California. Record temperatures and shifting winds have fanned the flames. Nearly 24,000 hectares have gone up in smoke.
It was wild. It was, we had to get the hell out of here.
So I'm kind of wondering what's going to be there when I go home, try to go home.
Over 8,000 people have been evacuated. Many won't have homes to return to.
There were many homes that were damaged during the fire, but when you have fire behavior that extreme with vegetation that close to the house, it becomes very, very difficult to safely defend a home.
California's in the middle of a heat wave, with temperatures reaching as high as 43 degrees Celsius. Smaller forest fires are also burning in Arizona, Colorado, and New Mexico. Further north, more than 200 fires have been reported in the Canadian province of British Columbia, forcing 10,000 people to flee their homes.
A magnitude 5.4 earthquake shook Ormoc City in the Philippines. The earthquake hit about 9 kilometers southeast of Ormoc City the morning of July 10th. It was the strongest aftershock yet, following the 6.5 magnitude quake that shook Leyte province on July 6. Mina Marasigan, spokesperson for the National Disaster Risk Reduction and Management Council, told CNN Philippines the source last week's quake killed 2 people and injured 349. CNN Philippines reports Ormoc City residents were seen rushing out of homes and businesses during Monday's aftershock. Several universities in Ormoc City were evacuated as well. GMA News reporter JP Soriano told DZBB Radio at least 50 students at Ormoc City National High School fainted during the aftershock. Soriano said a majority of the students who collapsed were on the second story of the building at the time.
35 people have died of measles across Europe in the past year, the World Health Organization said Tuesday, warning that vaccination remains crucial to stopping the spread. In the most recent case, a 6-year-old died in Italy on June 22nd. The boy's doctor confirmed that he had not been vaccinated against measles and died of the disease. Another measles death and over 3,300 cases have been reported in Italy alone since June 2016. Measles is a highly infectious disease transmitted through a virus.
It's a grim milestone, but the cholera outbreak in Yemen has now infected more than 300,000 people. The International Committee of the Red Cross used social media to remind the world of the disaster in which 1,600 people have died. In late June, the World Health Organization declared the epidemic in the war-torn nation the worst cholera outbreak in the world. Over half of the cases are children. The war has been a breeding ground for the disease, which spreads by feces getting into food or water and thrives in places of poor sanitation. Yemen's economic collapse means 30,000 health workers have not been paid for 10 months, so the UN and the WHO have stepped in with aid and by setting up rehydration points. International efforts have helped keep the death rate to a low 0.6% of cases, but it's a health disaster on top of war and near famine, with the underlying causes showing no signs of being resolved.
Almost 1 billion people around the world rely on cassava as a staple food. The root vegetable is a versatile and calorie-rich crop that is resilient enough to thrive in harsh climates. But the cassava has no defense against a tiny insect that is decimating crops across East Africa, with dire economic and humanitarian consequences. The whitefly carries 2 viruses that together destroy over $1 billion worth of cassava in sub-Saharan Africa each year. Cassava mosaic disease is the more established threat and does most of the damage, but scientists are even more alarmed by an outbreak of cassava brown streak disease, dubbed the Ebola of plants.
India's rivers will not be granted the same legal status as human beings. The country's Supreme Court ruled July 7th that the Ganges and Yamuna rivers are not living entities. The decision overturns a previous ruling in March by the High Court in Uttarakhand state, which said they were. The state government had appealed the High Court's verdict, saying it was legally unsustainable. The Supreme Court's ruling comes as a blow to many environmentalists who argue giving the rivers living status would help with conservation and protection efforts. 500 million people rely on the Ganges as a resource. However, it is reportedly one of the most polluted rivers in the world. Despite efforts by the Indian government, industrial waste and sewage continues to flow into it. India is not the only country to mull such a move. In March, New Zealand declared its Wanganui River as a living entity.
Less than 2 weeks after sales kicked off of recreational marijuana, Nevada is now making an emergency regulation because there's not enough pot. Stores in Nevada running out due to unanticipated demand. The regulation will allow more dispensaries to become licensed distributors, including liquor wholesalers.
According to the Department of Housing and Urban Development, nationwide homelessness is down, but in Colorado it's up 13% from 2015 to 2016. Some say there's a safety issue here. For example, north of Denver and Fort Collins, transient Jeffrey Scott Etheridge was recently charged with murder. At the Denver Public Library, many homeless wait out front for the doors to open in the morning to make that their home base for a bit. The city acknowledges when they congregate in areas that can create a public health, they can create a public health and safety risk. According to the Denver mayor's housing czar, at least 3/4 of the homeless population is working but can't afford Denver's rising rents.
Because rents in the city have increased so dramatically over the last 5 years. Therefore, we know our homeless population and those experiencing homelessness is growing.
So how did Denver get here? Some in law enforcement and some who are homeless tell us it's the recreational pot. Denver's population has grown by more than 100,000. The city right now, Bill, is really struggling for solutions.
Interesting story there, yeah.
And finally, let's end with a story from The Independent with a headline that belies a more serious reality for Japanese people.
That's right. You can see the headline in this article here. Young Japanese people are just not having sex. And let me throw this statistic at you. 43% of Japanese people between 18 and 34 have never never had any sexual experiences. That's according to new research. Well, this is a serious issue for Japan because this is a country facing a steep population decline, one that's even been called a demographic time bomb. It's affecting jobs, it's affecting consumer spending, business investments, all facets of society. But it seems that the reason that Japanese people are not having sex is a little bit more personal. One man said he finds women, quote, scary, while a woman said she thinks men can't be bothered to ask women out on dates because it's easier, I quote, to watch internet porn.
Oh dear.
Italian police officers from the country's anti-terrorism unit have raided a self-styled fascist beach club near Venice. The site at Chioggia is littered with a range of signs and posters that hark back to Italy's fascist era. One sign reads, "Anti-democratic regime-run zone, don't break our balls," while this one says, "No entry, gas chamber." He's not at home, he's in a public place, which has rules, the rules of the anti-fascist constitution. He must respect them if he wants to keep his beach club. However, manager Gianni Scarpa appeared unfazed. "I will continue my order, discipline and cleanliness. I am neither left nor right, nor am I afraid of Italian law." Venice Prefect Carlo Boffi on Monday signed an order for the establishment to immediately remove all references to fascism on signs, posters and banners. Scarpa was also ordered to avoid the further release of anti-democracy messages.
Belgium's ban on the full-face niqab in public doesn't violate any rules. That's according to a decision by the European Court of Human Rights. The ruling comes after 2 Muslim women tried to get the move legally overturned. Here's Charlotte Dubensky.
Well, this case was brought by 2 women, a Belgian national and a Moroccan, who said that it was their choice to wear the niqab. This is the veil covering which covers everything but their eyes, and that because of that, this ban had actually infringed their freedoms, and they said that the law was discriminatory. But the European Court of Human Rights disagreed, saying that however controversial the ban was, it was necessary in a democratic society, and it said it was necessary to guarantee the cohesiveness of living together. Several other countries have already instituted a ban on a full veil covering in the public areas, so that's schools, hospitals, government buildings, such as in France in 2011, where women who go out and wear a full veil covering, whether they are French nationals or tourists, facing a fine, while those who force women to wear a full veil covering could face a fine of up to €30,000 and time in jail. In the Netherlands, MPs have already backed the idea of this, yet it's not become law. But European countries are not the only ones that have instituted a ban or are considering it. The African country of Chad, which is a Muslim majority country, actually instituted a ban on the full face covering back in 2015, and that was following 2 suicide attacks in the country, and they said it was necessary to prevent terrorism in future.
Halima Aden, a Somali-American IMG model, is a featured model in American Eagle's Fall I Can campaign. Her photographs show her in New York modeling clothes happily with her other model friends. Aden praised American Eagle for letting her be a part of their campaign. She wrote on her Instagram, "Thank you, American Eagle, for encouraging young Americans to follow their passions, express their individuality, and pursue their unique paths. Hashtag I Can movement."
The Armed Forces of the Philippines opposes the idea of a mandatory ID for Muslims. The idea was discussed by Central Luzon Police during a meeting in early July at the Provincial Capitol building. Central Luzon Police suggested the special ID to allow authorities to help discover, quote, undesirable individuals and terrorists. During a press briefing at Malacanang on July 10th, AFP spokesman Brigadier General Restituto Padilla said the idea of issuing special IDs for just one sector of society was, quote, discriminatory. Padilla said, quote, "Our proposal is when we start checking identification of individuals, it should not be aimed at certain sectors of our society, but it must be applicable to everyone." The Philippine Star reported Padilla emphasized the Marawi crisis was not a religious war and not all Muslims support Maute terrorists.
Well, Spain has seen a sharp rise in migrants arriving from Africa this year. Between January and June, up to 6,500 landed in the country, compared with 8,000 arrivals in 2016. Now, for a brief moment here on the programme, we're going to have a look at what route the migrants are travelling from Africa. Well, the way from Morocco to Spain across the Mediterranean has become the second most popular. It's believed that the Morocco-Spain route is viewed as safer by migrants than going through Libya to Italy. Are facing up to the challenges posed by the new reality. A UK radio station recently had 25 hours of al-Qaeda recruitment propaganda. Its licence has since been revoked by communications regulator Ofcom. Iman FM broadcast speeches by Anwar al-Awlaki, who was killed in a US drone strike in Yemen in 2011. He was a radical American Muslim cleric of Yemeni origin. The UN Security Council states that he was a leader, recruiter and trainer for al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, also suspected of having had links to the 9/11 plot. Iman FM says it was unaware of the radical content of the speeches.
It's emerged that President Trump's son, Donald Trump Jr., agreed to meet with a Russian lawyer during the 2016 election campaign. That's according to a report in the New York Times. Citing 3 advisors to the White House, the newspaper said the meeting took place after Trump Jr. was promised damaging information about Hillary Clinton. The Times also reported President Trump's son-in-law, Jared Kushner, and his campaign manager, Paul Manafort, also attended the meeting at Trump Tower 2 weeks after Trump won the Republican nomination. According to the Times, the June meeting was the first private meeting between members of the president's inner circle and a Russian national.
Sort of amusing to hear
it cited confidential government records and interviews with people familiar with the documents. A spokesman for President Trump said he was not aware of and did not attend the meeting reported by the Times.
Monday, Vladimir Putin's spokesperson Dmitry Peskov said they didn't know about the meeting and, quote, cannot keep track of every Russian lawyer and their meetings domestically or abroad. A lot of attention on this meeting in the wake of alleged findings that Russia hacked the 2016 presidential election and President Donald Trump's recent meeting with Putin. Trump's son added a bit of sarcasm to the mix, tweeting, "Obviously, I'm the first person on a campaign to ever take a meeting to hear info about an opponent. Went nowhere, but had to listen."
I have a quick statement that I will read from the president. My son is a high quality person, and I applaud his transparency. And beyond that, I'm going to have to refer everything on this matter to John Jr.'s counsel and outside counsel, and won't have anything else to add beyond that today.
Russia ready to expel dozens of American diplomats. It's in response to a recent round of U.S. sanctions against Russia. That's according to Russian newspaper Izvestaya. According to Business Insider, Andrei Klimov, he's a Russian senator, told the paper that Russia had already waited 6 months for the Trump administration to improve relations with them. Now, Klimov says Russia is forced to, quote, draw a line. This coming after the United States expelled 35 Russian diplomats and seized Russian diplomatic compounds in Maryland. That was in response to alleged interference in the 2016 presidential election. According to the paper, Trump and Putin's meeting at the G20 summit wasn't what Russia had hoped, and since there was no agreement on the lightening of U.S. sanctions against Russia, the country is taking action. It's reportedly also planning to seize U.S. government property in a forest region outside of Moscow, but not the American ambassador's home and the American International School in Russia.
Meanwhile, the White House says it continues to view Russia as a threat. That's despite the US president's, quote, tremendous meeting with Vladimir Putin at the G20 summit, where they discussed a cybersecurity deal.
We recognize that Russia is a cyber threat, but we also recognize the need to have conversations with our adversaries.
However, after the G20 summit in Hamburg last week, Trump wrote an optimistic tweet on a potential joint cybersecurity unit. The idea, however, was roundly criticized over Russia's alleged hacking activities.
Seeking a roadmap to NATO membership, Ukraine has rolled out the red carpet for the head of the military alliance. President Petro Poroshenko has pledged reforms by 2020 to meet the requirements. Russia is unimpressed, warning that Ukraine joining NATO would not boost stability and security in Europe. It's none of your business seems to be NATO's message.
NATO will continue to support Ukraine on the path towards a close relationship with NATO.
For 20 years, NATO's had a partnership with Ukraine. It takes many forms, including drills like this. NATO's provided Kiev with equipment to uncover the perpetrators of a cyber attack that hit Ukraine in June and spread globally.
China says it's not responsible for North Korea, at least not entirely. North Korea has ramped up its nuclear program in recent months. The US, Japan, and South Korea have called on China to rein in its ally. But on Tuesday, China's foreign ministry denounced what it calls the China responsibility theory. It wants all parties to step up and share some of the burden. China is North Korea's main trading partner and ally. China worries cutting North Korea off could lead to an immigration crisis and various other problems. China has also blamed the US and South Korea for rising tensions on the Korean peninsula. After North Korea's successful launch of an intercontinental ballistic missile last week, the US Air Force sent bombers to fly over the area as a warning. The US also recently tested its anti-missile defense system, but that was planned before North Korea did its ICBM test.
The United States, Japan, and India kicked off their annual joint naval exercises on Friday, the largest iteration since these drills were first conducted a quarter-century ago. The annual exercises, known as Malabar, launched on July 7th and will be held for 10 days off the coast of India. On the U.S. side, the exercises feature the USS Nimitz Carrier Strike Group, which includes a guided missile cruiser and 3 destroyers, an attack submarine, and a land-based P-8 Poseidon maritime patrol craft. India's lone carrier, Vikramaditya, and Japan's biggest warship, the helicopter carrier Izumo, will also participate. The 3 navies will conduct joint surface and air warfare and high-value target defense drills. The U.S. Navy said that these drills will help the 3 countries better tackle maritime threats in the Asia-Pacific region against the rising weight of China.
Syrian monitoring group says it has credible information that the leader of Daesh has died. The Syrian Observatory for Human Rights says commanders of Daesh have confirmed Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi died in eastern Deir ez-Zor province in Syria near the Iraqi border. They didn't specify how or when he died. It's not the first time news of his death has been reported, but the monitoring group has been a credible source during the Syrian conflict. The Pentagon says it cannot corroborate this latest claim.
A city in ruins. Mountains of rubble are all that remains of West Mosul. Rebuilding will take many years and hundreds of millions of dollars. For the residents who lived under the Islamic State group, there's also psychological trauma to overcome.
We see people with nothing, highly traumatized. Living under ISIS has not been easy. You know, the level of violence have been going through. Plus not having food, not having water, not having anything, especially for children and women, has been terrible.
Many who were able to fled the fighting. Nearly half of the city were forced from their homes. Now the battle's over, Mosul has to overcome a humanitarian crisis. 700,000 people remain displaced. It could be months before they're able to return. In some neighborhoods, 70% of buildings have been destroyed.
If we don't want ISIS to come back, we have to close the gap. And we close the gap providing education, providing the minimum service, providing job, good governance for the people. If we don't do that, ISIS will come back.
Nearly 30 aid organizations working in Iraq have issued a joint call, asking for international support to rebuild the city. The effort's expected to cost around $1 billion.
Terror arrest here in the United States. A highly decorated U.S. soldier has been charged with trying to provide material support to ISIS. He's believed to be the first active duty service member to face these kinds of charges. Our senior justice correspondent Pierre Thomas is tracking the case. Good morning, Pierre.
George, good morning. The FBI says they arrested Ikaika Kang, a decorated soldier once honored for combating terrorism, after becoming increasingly concerned that he would turn to violence in the name of ISIS. Kang is a veteran of Afghanistan and an active U.S. Army sergeant and an expert marksman. According to the FBI, King was arrested Saturday shortly after telling an undercover agent posing as an ISIS radical that he wanted to take his rifle, his magazines, and kill a bunch of people, George.
And Pierre, any sense of how he became radicalized?
George, prosecutors suggested that he was radicalized online. They say the FBI found 146 videos and 671 graphic files that reference ISIS and violence on his laptop.